Number 11, a lot of the stressors Self-Reg talks about are the ones we can't reduce because they are simply a part of life in school. Kids have to learn to cope.
So there's a lot of stuff going on there. The first part is true. The first part is there are stresses in school that will be, for some children, difficult stresses. So, for example, the very fact that you're in a classroom with a lot of other children, I mean, that's a stress for some kids, a big stress. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, and I suppose that the thinking here is, well, you can go through it. Okay. The problem with the misconception is the second part, the cope. And this is the self-control paradigm in spades, that you got to suck it up. You've got to, yes, so there are all these stresses and you have to develop the muscle to, well, cope. I mean, this is adaptive coping strategies. So there are so many things wrong with that, so many things that harm everyone, not just the child or the student, but also the educator and the staff. What we're looking for in Self-Reg is, yes, we want to reduce stressors where we can. And what we find when we go into a school is that forget about the stresses you can't reduce. Let's look at the ones we can reduce. And boy, there's a lot. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that what we find is the essence here is as you do Self-Reg, as you go through this process we've been talking about of learning, of understanding, that you begin to see through a completely different set of eyes. And one of the biggest stresses for a student, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, we are one of the biggest stresses. And because we don't understand the, say, difference between self-regulation and self-control, or between misbehavior and stress behavior, we ourselves, perhaps totally unconsciously, become a significant part of the child's stress overload. Instead of coping, then, what are we looking for? Coping is completely the wrong word. And so what we're looking for is insight. And I, as an educator, need insight into myself, into my students. My student needs insight. And together, what we can figure out, because we do want our child. So I have this kid, let's say, who does find this very stressful. Yeah. And I want him or her to be able to deal, to be able to learn, to thrive in a school experience, in a school environment. And so what we have to figure out together are the experiences that enable that child to regulate, possibly on a moment-by-moment basis. Not only, and so it's a complete shift. And the point is not how to give the child these skills so that they can bear this experience. Mm-hmm. The point is to give that child the self-awareness and the self-understanding so that that child can thrive in this experience, so that that child learns how to, and you know who was very good on this was Maria Montessori. Mm-hmm. So Montessori was wonderful at looking at the child and figuring out together the kinds of things that make education a joy. And that's the last thing I'll say on this one. The goal here is not to learn how to cope with stress. The goal here is to discover the joy that comes through education.
And you know, I can't help but notice this brick wall here. So I'm going to say two things to add to what Stuart just said. And one of them is that good quality pedagogy. It's a piece of it. So when we are the fixed wall and this is how you need to learn, and we're always looking for the children to have to adapt to however, I think that's a courageous conversation that we have to have. I love some of the evolving understandings that are happening in education about good quality pedagogy. It's actually naturally self-regulating. Yes. And so we have to look at that.
That's great.
And that's more of the why and why now. I'm not saying it always is that, but when we're the unmovable wall and how we're going to do things, That's a good sign about or it's how we always did it. It's a good one of the things to look at. The other one I want to say, so that's one that's challenging educators in particular to kind of look at that and look at your own pedagogy, and that's your practice around other areas as well, right? How you deal with problems that arise and so on. Relationships at home. You could look at any one of those things as, are you always expecting the other to cope and adapt with what you've set up, or is there more there in constant learning? But the other one I think is a conversation that we also need to be thinking about 2018. I have a pet peeve around folks that, and I have compassion for them, but are trying to compare it to 30, 40, 50 years ago. We cannot keep saying that things are not different. And again, I'm not supporting bubble wrapping or saying that everything is mental illness. I'm not saying that at all. But if we want to think that the number of stressors on our kids and ourselves as parents are not the same in 2018 as they were in 2010, let alone 40 years, we're wrong. And there is a finite limit to what any one of us can manage. Really, there is. And I think, and compassion for educators in particular, like how that field has changed. I've been in it for 20 years. The expectations on our folks, the amount of paperwork that, there's all sorts of things that are on are huge. Same with parents, and some of it we do to ourselves. Our phones are beeping constantly, but we do. That's a piece of looking at this. So when we're saying reduce this stress, when we say I can't change that, are we really sure? When can we unplug? When can we say no? How can we as educational leaders have these courageous look at ways we can reduce it? How can we?
That's just great.
Yeah, thinking of parents. You know how many times I have to fill out the same permission slip with. There has to be a point where we say Natalia, and they say basta, where we say enough. And what are the things we can start to do that on a little bit, because we are finite, and we are human, and that's a part of it as well.
Love it.